How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, we're going to discuss the first episode of Unlocked. It's a series on Netflix. I did see all eight, but I'm only going to do the first episode right now. If you guys want to see more, just let me know. This topic was suggested to me, so I figure I will devote my time and break down the first episode. If you're not familiar with the Netflix Unlocked series, basically Sheriff Higgins initiated this program in which he's going to unlock the cell doors, have no officer supervision, and then allow for the inmates to kind of govern themselves, or at least that's what the promo makes you think. When you watch the show, you'll see that there are some changes to that plan that's not originally mentioned in the promo. I get it. The promo wants to bring you in. With that said, before we start my breakdown, I just want to mention I have some books on the market. We have Inmate Manipulation Decoded. If you guys get a chance, please pick up that book. That book's used for training all across the country. It teaches you how to navigate through the games that inmates play. We also have How to Succeed in Corrections, Lessons Learned While Working in a Prison. That book is published by Blue 360 Media. It just has tons of advice for myself and others in the field who have worked the profession. And we also have, same company, Blue 360 Media, and we have tips for correctional super officers, new correctional officers and their supervisors. And that's also published by Blue 360 Media. Again, it's passages. That's not just for myself, but others in the field to help us navigate in this profession. And all those books, the links to those are in my description. All right, so guys, I did see all 8 episodes, but right now I'm just going to focus on season 1, episode 1 of the Unlock series. This is like a reaction video. I don't usually do these. And with that said, if you're interested in seeing another one, let me know. But first, I want to talk about the program itself real quick. The program is for 6 weeks. That's 7 days a week for 6 weeks. Now, if you compare that with the amount of time you watch on Netflix, so there's 8 episodes that average about 41 minutes each. So you have about 5 hours and 45 minutes of actual video footage that you're watching. Now, that 5 hours and 45 minutes, if you're actually more interested in the programming, the whole first episode is not about the programming. It's about what's before the program, before they implement it. So that's another 41 minutes that you have to take out of the total collection of time. So technically, what you have is about 4 hours and 55 minutes of actual programming footage. So basically, out of 1,008 hours, all you see is 4 hours and 55 minutes of the actual programming. That's less than 0.5% of the actual program. So again, the total for 6 weeks is 42 days times 24 hours. That's 1,008 hours. And all you are seeing is a total of 4 hours and 55 minutes of actual programming, of that actual initiative. Now, granted, I know you're not going to be able to see every minute by minute, but you have to be wary that you're only seeing a small glimpse, and that glimpse could be manipulated into any narrative that they want to push. So, I mean, think about it. It's less than 0.5%. Let's see. This was produced by Lucky 8. So they're the ones that produce 60 Days In. For this one, the location is the Pulaski County Jail. They're doing it in H unit. And this is the sheriff's effort to introduce a program that he's hoping to go ahead and stretch out into other units. So I'm assuming they're going to try to make a second season out of this, a third season, a fourth season, whatever it is. It's a slow rollout. And the sheriff's name is Eric Higgins. With that said, all inmates in this unit are considered felons. That's what he mentions. They're either charged or convicted. Side note, his idea, however non-original it might be, I don't think this is an original idea. I really don't. I have worked in areas, I have seen areas in which there is no direct supervision by staff. I'm not saying staff isn't watching them. There is just no direct supervision. There's no one on the floor with them. And again, if you look at the promo makes it look like all the doors are unlocked and there's no officers around. So in our mind, we're thinking, wow, there's going to be no officers watching them. But that's not the picture that he paints in the first episode. So having said that, when he mentions that there will be officers, but they're kind of seated at a distance, they're not directly in the unit, all of a sudden the pioneer behind this idea starts to lessen in my head. His idea, however non-original it might be, was his solution to battle against understaffing. And he does mention that. He basically says the facility is understaffed, or maybe I read that somewhere. I read that he mentioned that the facility was understaffed, and this was an idea to help with the understaffing. So basically, recruitment, retention, no, let's just go ahead and see if the inmates can govern themselves. I mean, who needs officers when the inmates can govern themselves? His goal is to eventually branch this program out to other units. With that said, without custody's due diligence, there will be no trusted proactive or reactive measures. So with that said, even if you're looking to have a unit that's self-governed by the inmates, you still need staff to be around for proactive and reactive measures, which means they have to have direct observation. So having said that, even if the promo states no officers, be advised right off the get-go, when you're watching the show, he makes sure he mitigates some liability by saying, no, there is staff involvement. There will be staff watching it, just not on the pod. So that's a little bit different than what's being promoted on the Netflix trailer. So right off the bat, as they mentioned, as they promote violence and understaffing, as if that is their main worry, but the real focus is on lack of out-of-cell time. So I think there's a political agenda here. So he does promote that the facility is truly violent, and he does promote that they're understaffed. But then the main part underneath all that is out-of-cell time, that the inmates are trapped for 23-1. Well, mind you, if they're truly violent and we are understaffed, then that truly makes sense why they're locked in 23-1, because they require direct observation. But with that said, this becomes his selling point to go ahead and, as the promo states, unlock all cell doors and go ahead and allow the inmates to self-govern themselves, which we know is clearly not the case once the show starts to progress. But I do believe the hidden agenda here is the out-of-cell time. Lucky 8 has been known to not paint such a favorable picture in regards to the criminal justice system and our work that we do. And sometimes a lot of these sheriffs here, not saying it's him, but you never know, decide to use this as a political maneuvering because it gets the initiative into what people believe the criminal justice system is about. So having said that, this also could be a ploy for someone in politics to put their name out there and be known as that pioneer when it comes to criminal justice reform. With that said, if you do look a little deeper, once you watch the first episode and it breaks away from the extreme of the program, I don't really think there's anything pioneer, because if it was exactly what the promo stated, the liability behind it all, as we'll discuss shortly, would be too great for anyone to want to take that risk. So instead of pushing for more resources, their agenda seems to be a self-governing agenda, an inmate-ran community. And side note, I don't like the word community. It can showcase unity, which puts the officers at a clear disadvantage. Even a lieutenant at one point becomes concerned about the potential for a riot. Imagine a united community rioting. The reason why I jumped on that thought was, believe it or not, our biggest threat are when inmates unite, especially if the cause is not a true just cause. I mean, yes, I don't mind inmates standing up for what they believe in, but if they find justification, whether it's from the outside or from each other, they can unite for things that really are not things that you want to unite on, which winds up putting us at risk, the officers who have to manage that unit, the supervisors that have to help the officers manage that unit. Most of the time, if we do have problems, it's usually with a selective few, and we can manage that. But when you allow the inmates to develop into a community, that can make it pretty hard for us to manage, because now it's not just us versus a few, it's us versus them all. So with that said, I know for some people on the outside looking in, they may be a little bit weary of what I'm saying here, but we have to be wary of what this community may stand against, because you can have an officer just doing their job, and all of a sudden this community can come in and not want that. And next thing you know, you got one officer versus the whole unit. They do mention the Norway prison system as the catch-all solution. I'll have Russ on the show one day and we'll talk about the Norway prison system. But one thing, the cost. Second thing is it's two different types of inmates. The inmates that we have in the States are not the same as the inmates that are out there in Norway. Russ will be more particular when we have him on the show to kind of break down why he believes the Norway system won't work here. But I'm tired of the U.S. prison system being compared to the Norway prison system. It's not the same. I'll have Russ break that down more specifically. The sheriff also points himself as a hero by stating he's making this decision. His name is on the line. For me, that's, again, just my opinion. That's more of a vanity thing, as if he's taken the biggest risk. And what, the risk for political gain? I don't know. Your name is on the line, your reputation, okay. But the real people that are taking the risk, to be honest with you, is the staff who have to try to implement, maintain, or more importantly, clean it up if it goes wrong. I know you have your reputation, but with that said, it's your reputation versus safety and security of staff and inmates. So granted, when you say your name is on the line, the only thing I think of at that point is your reputation or something for political gain, which you may sacrifice if it goes wrong. To be honest with you, the people that are taking the greater risk are the staff who are going to have to help implement this, maintain it, and then also, granted, if it goes wrong, they're going to have to get in there and clean that up immediately. And then the inmates who are going to be in this environment. And by the way, when it comes to having an environment that's conducive to rehabilitation, having open cells that allows every inmate out could make the other inmates a little bit weary, a little bit nervous, and therefore they can't be focused on anything that's rehabilitative if you're offering any programming, because they're more concerned about any threat that can happen at any moment. So sometimes it's good to have certain lockdowns of programming is being done so people could truly focus on what's being taught, because hopefully it's being done in a safer environment as opposed to a unit that's out in the open. But having said that, I've watched all 8 episodes. I don't see any programming being done in those units. I don't see any professional coming in facilitating program. Actually, I'm going to touch on something a little bit later that's mentioned at a meeting that he has with the inmates. Let's see. This paints a picture that these inmates are only allowed out 1 hour a day. So, the promo paints a picture that's 23-1, that the inmates are locked down for 23 hours a day and allowed out 1. Maybe that's for rec or congregate interaction. I don't know. So maybe that's the case. I'm not too familiar with their operations. But the 1 hour a day they may be focusing on could be recreation or some form of congregate interaction. My question would be, and it fails to mention, if the inmates have any out of cell time for programming, religious services, medical triage, court trips, phones, etc. By the way, as the series progresses, they don't show any efforts to program or even provide activities, even religious services to the population. I don't know if there are any. I mean, that would be great to know, but I don't see that. And I'm going to revisit that later on, because there's an inmate by the name of Lovelace who mentions that. And I'll get to that point in a little bit. So the first episode's a week worth of filming before the program begins. So that's 48 minutes out of 168 hours, less than 0.5% again. And all they basically need is 1 or 2 instances to sell the narrative. So when you're looking at this footage at the very beginning over the course of 7 days or 5 days, I forget whatever it is. I believe it's 7 days, because he mentions it's a week before the programming, 5 or 7 days, whatever it is. You're looking at snippets. So I'm sure in the course of that amount of time, that amount of hours, they're able to find a few things that promote violent inmates, because that's what they're trying to promote, because I believe they're trying to promote that to basically add to the risk that this sheriff is taking, the risk to his reputation. Now, granted, these inmates were that dangerous, because I don't know if they were filtered beforehand. Maybe people will know that if they were filtered before they even went into this, because mind you, what they've done on the outside is one thing, but institutional adjustment also matters. If they're not a problem in the facility and they actually seem to be doing the right thing, then the risk does lessen. But with that said, they promote a lot of what they've done on the outside as if that's where the greater risk is. For me, it's more of the institutional adjustment. Sometimes people may react on impulse on the outside, but that doesn't mean that they are truly, truly violent individuals on the inside. It could be that the situation got the best of them. So again, I believe they could have cherry-picked certain things and dragged it out at this point, or it could even have been scripted. That's another thing. They could have scripted it just to paint that narrative that points to the risk. But with that said, guys, if the risk was that great, nobody in their right mind would approve that. because of the liability. But let's get to that. At this point, the narrative is to point a higher than life risk to showcase how brave the sheriff is for initiating it. Brave in regards to his reputation and not necessarily the greater risk of which relates more to safety of his staff and the inmates in his charge. It seems to me his reputation in politics seems to mean more than the safety of staff and inmates. I hope that's not the case, but this is what I'm getting from watching it. This may be a crazy assumption, but on the surface, this is how I see it. And by the way, it's hard to get an honest perspective from them because they're not allowed to talk to us after the filming is done. They have a contract with the production company that literally limits who they can speak to. I was watching a news reporter the other day that wanted to get his perspective, and he's not allowed to provide it because he's tied up with the company. Basically, they may control who he's able to speak to kind of keep the narrative going. I don't think they're allowed to be interviewed by people that can maybe challenge what is being seen or maybe try to draw some truth in what's being seen. So when the show begins, he does mention a softer version of his program as opposed to what you saw in the promo, I guess to sell the show. He makes sure we are aware that there will be an officer directly outside of the unit watching everything on camera. This now to me makes me believe this idea is not as pioneer as the promo would make you believe. We do have facilities that have officers viewing activity from a secured location. Basically, they may not be actively touring the unit when all inmates are out at once, like recreation, mess, yard. I mean, when you have a group of inmates that come out at once, there could be some facilities that say, you know what, at this point, watch the unit from the camera and let them do their congregate or rec. So having said that, it looks like the hour that they're allowed out is recreation. So maybe there are some facilities that do have that direct oversight that want those officers on the floor, however many you're going to put out, or there's some if they're understaffed. Hey, while you're going to run rec, why don't you step out and watch everything on the camera? So again, I'm pretty familiar with the practice that doesn't always have the officer directly walking around, but there is an officer directly observing them through the camera. So again, when they show the softer side, it makes me think it's not as pioneer as the promo tells or shows, because the promo shows basically no officers and no the inmates are no locks. The inmates are out. So again, well, got to see that. Let's see how that works. But to me, once you watch the show, I don't think it is as pioneer as the promo makes it seem. The first episode introduces you to different inmates: Tiny, True Story, Mayhem, Eastside Ty, etc. You're introduced to their story to showcase how dangerous they are. They basically promote this basically promotes the greater risk the sheriff is taking. So when they talk to these guys, they basically emphasize how violent they are. But none of them actually talk about their time in the facility. This is more of, what got them locked up. They do discuss the process before the program was approved. They only showcase the last meeting when it looks like all the concerns were already brought up at past meetings. The sheriff does not truly go into what the concerns were or how they will be addressed. I can only assume the concerns would relate to safety and security issues like the potential for assaults, drug use, suicide, homicide, weapon manufacturing, the making of hooch, which you see throughout the show. So again, without that supervision, like the promo said, this is all the stuff that could wind up happening. But having said that, he's quick to probably tell them, no, we will have someone watching. And if there needs to be a reaction from staff, they'll be ready because we'll have people overseeing it that will let us know if we have to go in and address it. But of course, that's opposite of the promo. And again, if the promo was just that, and he basically went in to try to sell an idea that there will be no officer involvement, think about that, and we're going to let all the doors unlocked, and these are the type of felons we're dealing with, nobody in their right mind would approve it. And if he was running for election, granted, probably people push more towards the inmates because they know that's where the greater vote can come from because the amount of people that are locked up. That may not be a good idea to sell if one of those inmates were to get hurt. So he had to balance it out. So again, you see that at the meeting. I'm sure when these concerns were brought up in past meetings, the resolutions would be staff intervention to maintain safety and security. To me, that would be the only way this would be approved without the connected liability of what would be seen by many as negligence. If an inmate was to get seriously hurt or killed, overdose, suicide, whatever the case may be, this whole initiative could turn out to be negligence if it was directly what the promo stated. no officers and no locks, knowing that these are dangerous individuals. So it's negligence because not only are you doing this, you know of what could possibly happen. So if something was to happen, you can't deny the fact that you were unaware. So that it would become negligence, and that would become criminal if something was to happen. And that would probably hit the sheriff, his staff, everyone. Let's see. Basically, knowing the risk that's mentioned above, he was still willing to go on with the show in the hope to boost. I believe it could be a political career by claiming you're improving the criminal justice system. That's the goal right now, right? You want to get into politics. The big thing is sadly you attack the criminal justice system. That seems to be the motive lately. So if you want to move up in politics, that seems to be what people are doing. And then they try to initiate change, or they take credit for change. That's really not change. We've already been doing it for the most part. I mean, corrections has evolved, but most of the practices that we commit to are practice, or that we're changing into a practice we've already been doing. It's just someone wants to put their name on it and maybe change a little bit of it and then take full credit. Trust and believe the system has evolved, but it's not through the hard work of politicians. It's through the hard work of those that work the front line, that are putting the risk to implement things that make the system better. And yet, for some reason, we leave them out of it, which is doesn't make any sense to me. To be honest, I feel like he does make the risk sound greater than what it really is. Again, we talked about when he stated that the officer was going to be removed from the unit, and then promoting how dangerous these inmates are. With that said, if there was no prior discussion that alleviated liability in the form of staff intervention, no one in their right mind, especially experienced staff, would approve limited staff interaction around inmates, especially with a heightened chance to commit violent acts, these inmates. I'm assuming the inmates in H unit may have been screened for how well they adjusted to the jail setting. I guess so. We talked about like, institutional violence, stuff like that. And what they've done on the outside is one thing, but how they adjust on the inside is another. We never really see any feedback from his staff. They kind of go along with it, but we never really see if they truly agree with it. We never really even see if they truly agree with continuing it, but they do note their concerns. By the way, there's one part where she mentions pod bosses, that if you remove the officers off the unit, you're going to develop pod bosses. That happens with officers on the unit regardless. You are going to have inmates that have higher status or stain, and they do tend to be pod bosses. Sometimes they're older inmates. Sometimes they're inmates that head certain security threat groups. But with that said, I don't think pod bosses are unique. I think they're around regardless of officer intervention or not. In some cases, we can use the pod bosses for our own advantage. As for the shakedown, so they do a shakedown before they go to start this initiative. The shakedown was done 3 days before. As for the shakedown before the program, the shakedown was done 3 days before the program began. I mean, think about this. So inmates can do a lot within minutes after the shakedown, let alone 3 days prior. I was just curious, why 3 days prior? They also failed to mention what was the deal for the routine shakedowns. They do talk about shakedowns, and they do say it's going to be needed. But then the sheriff mentions, well, we're not going to be doing it every 3 hours. But they don't mention what would be the routine for shakedowns. But granted, shakedowns aren't really routine anyway. Routine searches are. So my bigger curiosity here is, were they still going to do routine searches? Does that mean that, per shift, an officer would find a way to get on that unit, maybe lock it down briefly just to kind of do their 3 routine searches? Or was that not done? I don't know what the policy is for the jail, but you should have routine searches. And I'm wondering if that was at least done, because I still think that's a big thing when it comes to safety and security. As for shakedowns are not done every day. They're not done every 3 hours. Usually shakedowns could either be targeted, or maybe, hey, let's just, go out there and see what we got going on. But they're not something that's done every day, because it absorbs a lot of resources. We wish we could do it every day, but it can't. So having said that, I'm thinking more of routine searches. Are we doing our routine searches there daily? I hope they did. I'm assuming during all this filming, there's a lot more staff interaction than we're made aware of. I'm sure there's more use of forces that could have been utilized, definitely more searches, but we don't know of that because they want to paint a picture that the facility was, that unit, H unit, was fully self-governed by the inmates. But I'll guarantee you there's a lot of paperwork that shows more inmate interaction, because again, the liability of it all. Can you imagine if you didn't have any searches done daily, and then something happens, and they say, well, what happened to the policy with routine searches that are done? Why are they not being done? Because of your program? Does this program violate any policies here? Because when we go to court, you're going to have a problem. Because when you did this program, you circumvented some policies that have been put there for safety and security reasons. So having said that, I'm just curious to see if they still did their routine searches, which I'm hoping they did. As I said, by the way, unit shakedowns are not done every day. Routine searches are, where routine searches neglected during the whole time of programming. On another note, how many shakedowns would be or were done throughout the course of the program? I mean, I guess to reduce liability, I'm assuming they were done more frequent than other units, or maybe they weren't because we still had oversight by staff. If staff caught a concern on camera, were they told to let it play out and then they can go in and respond? Or, I mean, to be honest, no staff in their right mind is going to let a concern play out like we saw on that show. So I'm actually thinking those may be scripted to some extent. No staff in their right mind allows for a threat to grow. They act immediately in their efforts to maintain a safe working environment, whether for themselves or for the inmates. Also, I hope staff is able to view the cameras being utilized by the production company in case there are concerns that must be addressed immediately. But I don't know if that's the case. I remember someone involved in the first season told me that they were not able to see any footage until the day it was released on TV, and that was the first season of 60 Days In. Basically, the sheriff did not have any final say of what was being shown. My biggest concern here, as it was for 60 Days In, if that's the case, the production company wants footage that will entertain an audience. Therefore, they may allow for things to play out longer than we would as custody professionals, as safety and security experts. For example, there was a contraband that Eastside, one of the inmates, admitted to having, and that was seen in the video after the search was done. I could assume that wasn't reported to staff or management, or if it was ignored, or all the dangers that may seem to be ignored are actually scripted. Because again, if I saw that, hey, we got to get on it. So either they're not telling me what they're seeing on the camera, which again is negligence if that camera ever shows up somewhere and someone does get hurt with that contraband, or it's just scripted. And at that point here, there's a level of trust that they give to the population, which also is a risk. I also like to know how they, when they did the shakedown, they didn't turn off any water. That's just me nitpicking. Before they entered the shakedown, usually you turn off the water, but if you notice when they do the shakedown, they get right on. People are already flushing the toilets. Usually, before you enter that unit, you turn the water off. So by the time you get there, the inmates can't flush the contraband. But I'm assuming watching them flush all that different contraband adds to the entertainment. Also, when the weapon was found in episode 1, they did find a weapon. They never mentioned what it was made of to see if there was a compromised area that needed to be addressed. In some cases, the discovery of a weapon could lock down a whole unit. So if you have a weapon that's made of, let's say, a fence piece or whatever it is, we need to know where that weapon came from. You know, sometimes you have to lock down a unit to make sure there's no area that's compromised. Or, hey, if there's one weapon, we have more. Let's find out where the source of this weapon was. I don't see an effort in that. I just see that we found a weapon, we got it out of the unit, and there's the victory. No, that's the red herring. Yeah, there's still some due diligence after that. Also, I like how all the high-ranking officials go into H unit as the sheriff goes out there to speak to them when he mentions that the program is going to start the next day. So it's him, it's all the high-ranking officials, and then he allows for the unit to be open and allows all the inmates to kind of circle around them. I think that's a huge risk. When you have high-level staff going on that unit, you don't want that unit to be not locked down. Think about this. If something was to happen to one of those members, and those are all the high-ranking officials, I saw the lieutenant, I saw the sheriff, I saw all the high-ranking officials, who runs the prison if something happens to them? That could be immediate reason for a hostage situation or just taking somebody out. If something was to happen in that moment, all the main staff who have the authority to run the prison would be held hostage or taken out. I think that was a tremendous risk. And again, also when you watch that on video, I just thought that whole conversation that he had with them was just, could be possible, a chance to grandstand, maybe get some votes from the inmates' families. I don't know, but I just felt that was a huge risk. You're the sheriff, you're putting a target on your back, and also all the higher ranking staff behind you. Sheriff Higgins, when addressing the inmates at that meeting, states, "When you all prove to me it can't be done in minutes." Well, okay, I may be paraphrasing here, but when all you inmates prove to me that it can't be done in 30 minutes, we're done. Basically, what he's saying is if by chance they mess up in 30 minutes, right after doing it, the whole program's done. It starts and can end that quick. That's what he's talking about on the extreme of it. So what 30 minutes or whatever it is, the extreme is he'll shut it down even within the first 30 minutes if it can't be done. If basically it goes on to mention if a fight happens or contraband, whatever it is, he has no problem shutting it down. So he lays down the law. Yet when that occurs, because they do find weapons, they do find hooch, they find plenty of contraband, they do have fights and assaults, he doesn't shut it down. So now you got to ask yourself, how do you garner if it's a success or not? Because you did have those issues and you didn't shut it down. So it was only successful because you didn't shut it down. To me, I just thought that was more of a grandstand moment. There's also an inmate by the name of Willie Lovelace that talks about things that must be offered in the prison to help them get out of jail instead of being more comfortable in jail. And this hit home to me. Like, where are the programs? Where are the stuff that we can utilize to help us rehabilitate to leave? And the sheriff basically just doesn't answer that question. Basically, he says, well, this is what I'm trying to do here, but he still doesn't answer the inmate's question of where's the program in here? Where's the stuff that we could take to help rehabilitate us behind this wall? And then basically he goes back on his grandstand. All right, so that's my quick input. I'm curious to, what you guys think. And if you guys want me to do another episode, I will. This just takes time to put together. Again, this is just my input. It's just my perspective. If there's things that I'm wrong on, please comment. But with that said, some of it is what I believe to be pretty accurate. But it's only my belief because they don't allow the people that are on the show to speak to anybody unless they filter it first, which I'm sure they may even develop the questions that we're allowed to ask, which I feel would be unfair. As always, guys, the show is taped. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. Stay safe.